Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of making my wall hanging for my doll's house. If you've watched part 1 you will know that I've settled on the third design and it was a challenge to get to that point. If you've not watched part 1 yet, please do go back and watch that first. So in this video I am just making the little bar that's going to hang up the wall hanging, and also I'm going to fold back the wall hanging so that there's some pleated curtain across the door, and I'm hopefully going to make a little tassel that's going to be the tie back. I hope that you enjoy it, and by the end of this video I aim to have this wall hanging hung in my doll's house ready to show you. To make the little picture rail that the wall hanging is going to hang from, I am using 2 kebab skewers. I'm using 2 instead of 1, first of all because 1 wasn't long enough, and the second reason is because these kebab skewers have a little thicker edge at each end, and I wanted to use this thicker edge to be the bit where it attaches to the beam, so I needed 1 at each side. So I am starting by gluing the 2 together. And whilst they're gluing, I'm going to work on making this little pleated edge for the curtain that goes over the doorway. When I visited Hardwick Hall, they had tapestries as wall hangings across all of the walls that came right over the doors, and I believe that was for warmth and insulation as well as for decoration. So I'm just folding this back here. I actually, after folding this back and pinned it, took it over to my doll's house and it didn't look quite right, so I did rearrange the pleats a little bit, which you will see in a second. So I just pinned it back before going to check out to see if it looked correct or not. And when I took it over to the doll's house and I changed it, you can see here I folded it back so you can see a little bit of the underside of the fabric, which is a little bit more of a vibrant red. So once I'd pinned that back, I then sewed it into place. Although I will be adding a tassel, I thought it best to put a few little stitches in so that it was held nice and firmly. I'm just putting about 3 stitches in here in positions where it's underneath each pleat so you can't actually see the cotton. I'm hoping that my mum might have some thread that's appropriate for making the tassel, because I've not got any, so I'm hoping that I can have a look through what she's got. She doesn't know that yet, but I'll give her a little call later and see. So you can see that my stitching's a little bit messy at the back there, but it doesn't matter too much because that isn't an area that you're going to see. Okay, so I then went back to my little bar that's going to hang up this wall hanging. The glue hadn't actually glued it very well. When I have used the Yoo-Hoo glue previously on the wood, it's been okay, so I might just have to put a little bit more glue on if needed, but I thought I'd give it a paint. It doesn't matter too much if it's a little bit wobbly, but obviously it does need to be sturdy enough to hold the weight of the wall hanging. So I painted every edge, and the little bit of wood that I've just got in my hand there is just so that I didn't get my fingers mucky, and then I left that to dry before painting the other side of it. Once dry, I pushed the bar through the hoops, and the little bit that I said wasn't joined quite well enough, that was a bit wobbly, did need re-sticking, so I put a little bit more glue onto it, and then it was ready to hang in the doll's house. And before I hung it, my mum arrived with all of her threads, and we had a look at which would be the most appropriate for making a tassel. So I decided on the browns and purple threads from this selection here, and I started by laying a pile of them out like this, and then I used some of the darker ones to tie a little knot around them at the halfway point. I then doubled the threads over. So the dark thread there would be the cord that will wrap around the curtain, and these threads at the bottom are the tassels. And I then took some more threads the same colour as the tassels, and an extra pair of hands were really helpful here just whilst I was tying the knot. So I tied a knot around the top there. My cat then came to help, and after tying this one knot, I did tie a second knot just to make sure that it was nice and secure. and I tied a third knot as well. After this, the bit of thread that I'd used initially to tie that knot in the centre of the threads, I decided to plait because there were about 3 threads, just a few more than 3 threads I think it was, and I thought if I plait them that'll make a nice neat little cord. So after I'd plaited them, I then tied them off at the end just by knotting them a bit like a friendship bracelet, where you take the left hand strand over the middle one and then over the one on the right. And this left me with an end here which I threaded onto a needle, and I then pushed through my little tapestry wall hanging and through to the other side where I tied it to the other end. It was tricky to pull it through just because I'd put that knot in at the end of the plait, but I gave it a little pull and it did come eventually, and then I tied it in the knot here until that was nice and secure, chopped off any remaining thread, and there was my tassel. Now at the moment the tassel was too long, so it was time to trim off the bottom ends and then to arrange the threads to make sure that they looked nice and neat. To hang my wall tapestry, I actually moved my whole doll's house over nearer my window because I was struggling to see what I was doing in the position that it was in. I decided to use some of these glue dots that were actually in the doll's house when I bought it for £15 from the recycling centre, and I decided to use these to stick them down so that the fabric would hang quite neatly against the wall. You will notice in a minute when the fabric is hanging, it looks a little bit like it's really creased, but that's just in the video. In real life, it looks like it's got pleats running down it. So I'm sorry that it looks a bit creased on here, but it has had a good iron. It's not creased in real life. So I used the glue dots to stick it down in various places, just to make sure that it was nice and secure. And the little bar that I made earlier was secured onto the beam on the ceiling. You will notice down the side here there looks like a white gap between the stairs and the bottom of the tapestry. Now from this angle that gap looks quite big, but from the front of the doll's house it doesn't, and I did consider putting some trim along the bottom of this, just like this. Now from the side here, from this angle, that looks quite nice, but actually from the front of the doll's house that looked as if it was hanging over the stairs a little bit too much and was making it look too thick. So I've decided to leave this gap because from the front you can't actually see it. Now you can see here what I mean about the creases. So it's not actually creased, but it's just hanging with a little bit of a pleated effect because of where I've pulled it back over the door. The door still opens and shuts, so I'm really pleased with it. So it's taken a while to get to this point. Anyone who's watched the first part of this video and watched this one will know that I am really happy that this is now complete, and I'm also really pleased that you've joined me and watched the process. So thank you ever so much. Have a lovely day or have a lovely evening or whatever time of day it is, and thank you for watching.